Gemar Chatima Tova. I am here at Temple Shalom in Bridgewater. This is the talk for tonight for Kol Nidre 2020, 5781. When enemy armies approached the city and the people huddled in fear, the prophet cried out. The prophets cried out well in advance of that terrifying moment, but people didn't listen. The prophet admonished, return to God's ways, protect the orphan, the widow, and the stranger, protect the vulnerable. For a society that protects the weak will be strong. But the prophet's voice was a lonely voice. Most folks were convinced that God was on their side and everything would be okay. Then Assyrians surrounded the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel and destroyed it. Then the Babylonians surrounded Jerusalem, capital of Judah, and home of the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple, and destroyed it. And bitter exile followed. From that exile, another prophet arose to tell the people that when they returned to the land of Israel and rebuilt the temple near the end of the biblical era, the mistakes of false piety could not be repeated. Mouthing nice sayings when profiting off the poor, claiming to walk in God's ways when misusing power, fasting on holy days, while letting the marginalized in society stay marginalized, is a joke. This is what we read on Yom Kippur from the book of Isaiah. Lama, the people cry out, why, when we fasted, did you not see? When we starved our bodies, did you not pay heed? And God responds, because on your fast day, you see to your business and oppress all of your laborers. Because you fast in strife and contention and you strike with a wicked fist. Your fasting today is not such as to make your voice heard on high. Is such a fast that I desire, a day for people to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast? A day when Adonai is favorable? God continues. No, this is the fast I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke, is to share your bread with the hungry, and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to ignore your own kin. Then shall your light burst forth like the dawn, and your healing spring up quickly. Az yibakek shachar, your righteousness shall march before you, and the presence of Adonai shall guard you from behind. And, as often happens with prophetic voices, no one listened. Isaiah was right. We read his words because they remain our goal, our ideal, though we sadly learn that thundering, powerful words are not enough to change the world. Hearts must follow, and hands must follow. Fast forward 6 centuries, after the era of the prophets had ended, when there was no divinely inspired holy man to ignore anymore. In Roman times, zealots, all too certain of their own infallibility, brought war to Eretz Israel and devastation to Jerusalem. Trapped in the besieged capital, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw that there was no way back to the old normal, and just before Jewish forces met defeat, he escaped the doomed city by getting smuggled out, hidden in a coffin. Upon emerging behind Roman lines, he asked Vespasian, commander of the Roman forces and soon-to-be emperor, for shelter in the small coastal town of Yavne and to establish a Torah academy there. He does not ask for Jerusalem to be spared. Maybe he doesn't think it could happen. Maybe he doesn't think it should happen. The living Rabbi Yochanan stepping out of the coffin is a good image and a not too subtle metaphor. He uses his confinement as a time to work out how to build a Jewish culture that will work towards Isaiah's vision, even in hard times. What Rabbi Yochanan does is, in the very moment of crisis, begin a new chapter in Jewish history, leaving the temple mitzvot in the past, but urging acts of holiness and kindness in the everyday life of every Jew. He was not a prophet, and he did not know if it would work, if he was saving Judaism or destroying it. I picture him getting information, looking thoroughly into the situation and into his soul, taking a deep breath and acting. In a crisis, he restarted the Jewish people as a people who could exist anywhere, which is good, because we went on to live everywhere. The values we learned in our suffering became our mission: justice and mercy, care for the vulnerable, building lives of meaning in the face of suffering and casual cruelty. one mitzvah at a time, step by step. Out of the embers of Jerusalem's destruction, a rededicated people was born. Rabban Yochanan was powerless to change the fate of Jerusalem. Careless men, tragically overconfident in their strength, were in charge of its fate. But Rabban Yochanan did not despair. If he could not save Jerusalem, he could save Judaism. The story is told that once Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was walking with his disciple Rabbi Yeshua near Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple. Rabbi Yeshua looked at the ruins of the temple and said, "Oy lanu, alas for us. The place that atoned for the sins of the people of Israel through the ritual of animal sacrifice lies in ruins." Then Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai spoke to him these words of comfort. "Be not grieved, my son. There is another, equally meritorious way of gaining atonement, even though the temple is destroyed. We can still gain atonement through deeds of loving kindness. For it is written in the biblical book of Hosea, Ki chesed chfatzti, v'lo zavach. Kindness I desire, says God, not sacrifice." Isaiah and Rabban Yochanan make clear that the kind of selfishness that leads to misery is not new to our days. The temptations of me first was not invented with pandemic hoarding, or with Twitter warriors, or with those who justify bigotry. And I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about us. Today you don't commit to changing someone else. We commit to changing ourselves. Isaiah may have thought that the threat of destruction would lead to changed behavior. Rabban Yochanan thought that the hope of acting in a godly way even after destruction would motivate. What I see during this pandemic and during this time of societal reckoning is acting out of love, not fear, and caring, not selfishness, uncovers our best selves. This year, the most touching moments have been the acts of chesed, the acts of kindness. I would call elderly members of our Temple Shalom community, checking in on them, and they would tell me how they just got off the phone with a fellow congregant, someone in better health, who had just been doing grocery shopping for them. For months. I dropped off Shiva materials at home because COVID had taken a loved one, and I would hear how a fellow congregant had allowed somebody to stay safe by picking up prescriptions, especially in the early, unsettling days of this pandemic. I would get calls from kids sent home from college last spring, asking how they can help those in greater need. That last one isn't entirely true. Young people don't really call me, they text, but for the old folks, they called. I sometimes got calls from people who were themselves locked in, unable to leave their home, calling and checking in on me, seeing how I was doing. I'm here worried about them, and they're worried about me. But rather than wallowing in despair, they acted. Like Isaiah's call, the wider we expand the circle of our concern to those who cry out for greater justice and those in need, and for those unable to cry out, the closer we come to Isaiah's still echoing call. Now, we have many problems. Thank God it is not an enemy army at the gates, but a rising tide of hate, and a need to address persistent injustices, and a rubric to use the blessings of the internet to spread connection and not anger. The calls of our ancestors remind us there is a better society we can build. A healthy person is not an individual who never gets sick. A healthy person is someone who is able to recover from life's inevitable illnesses. The same is true for institutions, for peoples, and nations. It is not that sickness is a sign of weakness. It is a sign that we need to seek recovery. And this past year has been difficult. And this coming year will be difficult. And by remembering the voice of Isaiah, by cultivating the habits of mind and spirit that allowed Rabban Yochanan to emerge from his coffin to rebuild his people, we will help ourselves and our community and our nation recover. When we emerge from this time, and even before, we will have our Rabban Yochanan moment, and we have to find a way to make Isaiah's vision real. You are not obligated to complete this task, but neither are you free to desist from it. May this fast not be an empty one, but one that fills us with the hunger to look after each other and to ensure that we emerge to help each other embrace our highest ideals, whatever the future holds. And may our people's ancient call to the ethical life find new vitality in the work of our hands, and may you and your loved ones be sealed for a year of love, of health, and of shalom. Gemar Chatima Tava.